Natasha Monroe, a renowned art curator in New York, lost everything in a single live television interview. A cheating husband, the blinding stage lights, the cruel questions, and a woman standing there, not crying, only smiling as she walked away. Everyone thought that was the end of her. Until a man on the other side of the country, Dante Rossi, CEO of a major tech corporation in Seattle, saw that broadcast and decided to send her an invitation. A simple invitation, not out of pity, but to begin again. From that email, a journey began, the journey of a woman carrying an unborn child and a man who once believed his heart had turned to ice. Amid Seattle's rain, the breath of art, and the first cry of baby hope, they found what both had thought was gone: faith, healing, and a love not born of fate, but of choice. This is not a fairy tale. It is the story of three people who chose to stay even when they had every reason to walk away. Welcome to We Chose Each Other, a tale of faith, hope, and hearts brave enough to love again. The studio lights that morning shone brighter than ever. The spotlights bathed Natasha Monroe's face in a gentle glow. Her skin, beneath the lightest touch of makeup, flushed softly. The emerald silk dress traced the curve of a woman carrying life within her, 6 months pregnant, and still the embodiment of grace. No one in the room, not even Natasha herself, knew that the world she had built with such care would crumble before millions of live viewers in just a few minutes. The host, Patricia Lane, smiled brightly, her sweet voice as warm as always. Natasha Monroe, welcome to Morning Spotlight. Congratulations on Voices of the Forgotten. Critics are calling it the most influential art event of the year. How do you feel? Natasha smiled, poised and serene. It's wonderful. I think, as artists, the most precious thing we can have is to be heard, not just our own voices, but those of the forgotten. Applause filled the room. The director signaled the cameraman from the control booth to zoom in on her face. Everything seemed perfect: the lighting, the smile, the image of a successful and content woman. Patricia leaned in, her eyes glinting with mischief. And there's something else our audience is curious about. Congratulations. You're about to be a mom, a little girl, right? Natasha placed her hand gently on her belly, her gaze softening. Yes, just 3 more months. She's the greatest gift I've ever received. The audience gasped and clapped. The lights seemed warmer. Everything was beautiful, peaceful until Patricia continued, her cheerful tone oblivious to the storm she was about to unleash. Let's make this even more exciting. How about we call your husband, Devon Monroe, and share the good news live? The whole country wants to hear his congratulations. Laughter. Applause. Natasha froze for just a heartbeat long enough for the camera to catch it. Oh, I'm not sure. He's at work. Just a minute. It'll be adorable. Patricia gestured for her assistant to make the call. The crowd cheered. The cameras stayed fixed on Natasha, the world waiting for a picture-perfect moment. The call connected. The giant screen behind them lit up, but instead of Devon's face, another image appeared. A young woman, with disheveled hair, wearing a man's shirt, staring at the camera in confusion. "Hello?" the woman murmured, sleepy-eyed, then froze as she took in the scene, the lights, the audience, and Natasha Monroe's face. The studio fell silent. Natasha's body went rigid. The blood in her veins turned to ice. Simone. She whispered so softly the microphone barely caught it. The name escaped her lips like a nightmare called into being. Simone, her college best friend, the woman she had introduced to her husband 8 months ago. From behind Simone, Devon appeared, shirtless. His expression shifted from panic to a cold, defiant calm. He snatched the phone from Simone's hand and looked straight into the camera. "Natasha," he said, voice hollow and terrifyingly steady, "I was going to tell you, but I guess this is better." Patricia frantically gestured to cut the feed, but it was too late. "What?" Natasha breathed. Devon glanced around the hotel room behind him, then gave a small, bitter laugh. This is my real life. I don't want the gallery, your perfection, or that baby. You lied to me. You're using it to trap me. I don't want to be a father." The air shattered like breaking glass. Gasps rippled through the audience. Patricia tried to interject. "Devon, you're live on air." "Good," he interrupted. "Let the whole world know. I haven't loved you for over a year. Simone and I have been together for 8 months. And that baby," he pointed toward Natasha through the screen. "It's a mistake I refuse to let ruin my life." For a few seconds, the world went silent. All sound vanished, leaving only the pounding of Natasha's heart and the rush of blood in her ears. The man who had once sworn before God now stood bare, stripped of decency, of love before the crowd. Patricia signaled again. The screen went black. The studio was still. Natasha sat frozen, her hand still resting on her belly. A technician rushed to her side, whispering something, but she couldn't hear. Everything blurred, as if someone had pulled the air out of the world. When she finally stood, the audience clapped not out of praise, but in stunned disbelief. She left the stage without looking back, walking through the blinding hallway lights. The reflections in her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. Outside, camera operators, staff, security, everyone stepped aside. No one spoke. She just kept walking, through the back door, down the sterile hallway, into the cold quiet of the underground parking lot. When the metal door closed behind her, Natasha realized her hands were trembling. She opened her car door, sank into the seat, and exhaled a broken, shuddering sound that seemed to tear through her lungs. "Just go home," she whispered, hand over her belly. "Just go home." Her phone buzzed endlessly calls, messages, headlines flashing by the minute. Natasha switched to airplane mode and sat in silence, listening to her own breathing, fighting back the tears she feared, once released, might never stop. Across the country, rain fell softly over Seattle. In the 38th floor office of Rossi Global, the light from a monitor reflected on a man's face as he replayed the broadcast frame by frame, second by second, watching how she held herself in the middle of public ruin. Dante Rossi, founder, tech billionaire, and cultural investor, wasn't the kind of man who watched morning television. But the clip was everywhere, from social media to financial news. Art curator betrayed live on air. He ignored the headlines. He rewound to when Natasha stayed silent, the lights falling across her calm, devastatingly composed face. A woman losing everything, yet standing tall, without screaming, without shattering only her eyes, so quiet in their pain. He muted the video and stared. A woman destroyed, yet somehow unbroken. "Maya," he called, voice deep and even. His assistant appeared in the doorway. "Yes, Mr. Rossi? You know Natasha Monroe, the curator from Riverside Gallery in New York." "Yes, sir. Her exhibition's making waves." "But," Maya hesitated, "that incident this morning." "I know." Dante didn't look away from the screen. "Find out everything about her. But don't reach out yet. She needs time." Maya nodded. "You're considering her for a consultant position?" Dante's lips curved faintly. "No. I want her to lead our entire community culture initiative. I want to build something real, and the only real person I saw today was her." Maya was silent for a moment, then smiled softly. "I'll get started." When the door closed, Dante replayed when Natasha stood and walked away. He froze the frame, her back turned, the lights reflecting in her eyes. He murmured, almost to himself, "That woman lost everything and still kept her dignity. That's something money can't buy." Outside, the rain drummed gently against the glass, steady, deliberate, like the rhythm of fate. Across the country, two lives, unaware of each other, had just been quietly intertwined, bound by a moment of pain witnessed by an entire nation. And that was where the story began. 3 days after the fateful broadcast, news of the artist betrayed by her husband live on television still flooded newspapers, social media, talk shows, and podcasts. Natasha Monroe's name appeared hundreds of times each hour, not as an art curator, but as the year's ultimate media victim. She turned off every notification. No one heard her voice, they only saw the hurried photographs. A woman in a grey coat and knit hat, leaving her apartment building with swollen eyes and a composed expression. The whole world was talking, but only the child in her womb could hear her heavy breaths through sleepless nights. Her Manhattan apartment had once been her sanctuary, filled with light, paintings, and the hum of classical music from an old speaker. Now, Everything was too bright, too still. Natasha moved slowly through it, each step cautious, as if she were walking across the dark edges of memory. She still hadn't cried. Perhaps her tears had been left somewhere in that studio. When her laptop screen flickered with a new email notification, Natasha almost deleted it without reading. But the sender's name made her pause. Maya Chen, Executive Assistant, Rossi Global, Seattle. She read quickly. Dear Miss Monroe, Mr. Dante Rossi, CEO of Rossi Global, has followed your work at Riverside Gallery for some time. He is particularly interested in your project, Voices of the Forgotten, and would like to meet to discuss a potential community art collaboration. With best regards and respect, Maya Chen. Natasha read it twice. There was not a single word about the scandal, no sympathy, just interested in your work. After days of hearing nothing but, "Are you okay?" Or, "You should sue him." The email felt strangely like a breath of normalcy in a chaotic world. She typed a short reply. "Thank you. I'll consider it and get back to you soon." Then she shut the laptop, but the question lingered. Why would someone like Dante Rossi want to meet me now, of all times? She knew who he was. Everyone did. Rossi Global is a multinational tech finance art conglomerate headquartered in Seattle. Dante Rossi was often called the billionaire with an artist's heart, a man who spent hundreds of millions on cultural and educational programs instead of yachts or private islands. Someone like him meeting her, a woman now reduced to a national punchline. She gave a dry laugh. Maybe they needed a sympathetic face to polish their humanitarian image. Or perhaps he was simply curious. Whatever the reason, she needed the work. She needed a beginning. 2 days later, Natasha sent her reply. "I'm ready to meet. Flying from New York to Seattle tomorrow. Thank you for the opportunity." She closed her laptop and exhaled. Outside her window, winter snow drifted gently over Fifth Avenue. Sometimes, the most critical decisions in life begin with a single click. Oh, voe. Seattle's airport that afternoon was wrapped in fog. The sky hung heavy and gray, the wind carrying the chill of Puget Sound. Natasha wore a long coat, one arm cradling her belly, cautious with every step. Maya Chen met her at the gate, her smile professional yet warm. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Monroe. Mr. Rossi will see you this evening at Rossi Global headquarters." The building appeared like a vast prism of glass reflecting the dim sky. Soft light shimmered across Lake Union, where small boats drifted like fragments of quiet memory. Natasha stepped into the lobby. The elevator took her straight to the 38th floor. When the doors opened, the room was bathed in amber light, and he was there, Dante Rossi. Tall, composed, wearing a simple white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, he carried none of the aloofness one might expect from a man who owned an empire. When their eyes met, Natasha felt something strange, not the distance of meeting a billionaire, but the recognition of someone who somehow already understood her. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "Thank you for coming, especially now." "Natasha," she corrected gently. "And thank you for the invitation." He gestured toward a chair. The meeting room opened to a panoramic view of Seattle wrapped in violet dusk. "Rossi Global is expanding its community culture division," he began. "I've followed Voices of the Forgotten for some time. The way you chose your artists, the way you brought invisible people into the light that wasn't just art, it was humanity." Natasha smiled faintly. "You make it sound easy. Many people accuse me of politicizing art." "Perhaps," Dante replied, his gaze steady, "because they've never lived in silence. Art only matters when it reaches what's real in people." His words made her pause, not because of what he said, but how he said it. No pity, no flattery, just understanding. "Do you know why I wanted to meet you now?" he asked. "I suppose, because of the project." "In part," he said, his tone softening. "But truthfully, it's because that morning, when I watched the interview, I saw something rare in chaos. Dignity." His eyes were calm but unwavering. "You didn't scream. You didn't fight back. You stood up and walked away. That says more than words ever could." Natasha drew a slow breath. "And if I told you I didn't feel strong at all in that moment?" "The more honest, the more human," he said quietly. "We're not looking for perfect. We're looking for real." He slid a folder toward her. This is a preliminary proposal. I want you to lead the Cultural Development Initiative, a nationwide community art program. You'll have creative freedom, a team, and an independent budget. My only request, do it with the same heart you gave Voices of the Forgotten. Natasha flipped through the pages, numbers, plans, projections, and paused at the listed salary for creative director. This figure, it's 3 times what I make now. It's the value of impact, Dante said softly, then added, after a beat, it also includes premium medical coverage for your pregnancy. Natasha looked up, slightly startled. You've read my file thoroughly. I didn't read a file, he replied. I watched a woman fight to protect what she believed in, even as her world collapsed. And I thought that's someone I want to work with. There was no performance in his voice, no calculation, just sincerity. Natasha closed the folder and took a deep breath. You know, everyone looks at me with pity. And you hate that? I just want to be seen for who I am, not as the woman betrayed on live TV. Then it's fortunate, Dante said with a faint smile, that I've never seen you that way. A quiet moment settled between them. Rain tapped softly against the window. Natasha turned to the misty Seattle skyline, and for the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. I'll do it, she said. I'll take the project. Dante nodded, a gentle smile curving his lips. Welcome to Rossi Global, Natasha Monroe. They shook hands. His touch was warm, steady, not firm, not soft, but just enough to reassure without control. When she left the building, the Seattle breeze brushed her face. Natasha lifted her gaze to the lights reflecting on the lake. In that moment, she knew. A new chapter had begun, not because she'd been rescued, but because she had chosen to rise. Far above, on the 38th floor, Dante Rossi stood at the window, hands in his pockets, the city's lights gleaming against his thoughtful expression. He didn't know why her presence had quieted something in him, only that it had. Something had shifted inside him, quietly, profoundly. Their story had only just begun. Seattle greeted Natasha with a mist-like rain that never roared, only fell quietly and faithfully, the way she was learning to endure. Natasha arrived before the reception staff on her first day at Rossi Global. She carried her laptop, old exhibition sketches, and a leather-bound notebook still stained with the traces of tears on its last page. The elevator took her to the 32nd floor, the newly established Community Culture Division. No media noise, no invasive lights, only white hallways, the hum of printers, and the scent of freshly roasted coffee drifting from the pantry. Good morning, Miss Monroe. Maya Chen greeted her warmly. Mr. Rossi will be here after his call with the Tokyo investors, but he's asked that your office be ready. Natasha was taken aback when the door opened. Sunlight streaming in from tall windows, blank canvases leaning against the walls, a solid oak desk, and a small corner for sketching. On the desk lay a handwritten card in sharp, elegant script. Welcome to your new beginning. D.R. No flourishes, no mention of her past, just a simple welcome. Yet it was precisely that simplicity that made her heart tremble. The first meeting began at 9 a.m. sharp. Dante arrived on time, grey shirt, no tie, espresso in hand, calm, focused, but not cold. When he entered, the room subtly shifted. Everyone straightened a little. Thank you all for coming. This is Miss Natasha Monroe, Creative Director of the Cultural Development Initiative. His tone wasn't introducing a newcomer, it carried respect, as though she already belonged. Natasha met his eyes briefly and understood. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Natasha spoke little, preferring to listen, take notes, and observe. As people left, Dante paused at the door. Do you have a minute? Of course. They walked along the hallway overlooking Lake Union. The rain was still falling fine, steady, constant. I know it might take time for you to feel comfortable at work again, Dante said quietly. Take it slow. You don't need to prove anything. Are you worried I'm not strong enough? She asked, smiling faintly. No, he replied. I'm worried you're too strong. Strong people often forget they're allowed to rest. That simple sentence silenced her. For the first time in weeks, someone hadn't asked, "Are you okay?" but reminded her she didn't need to be okay all the time. That afternoon, as Natasha was leaving, Maya called out, "Mr. Rossi asked me to give you this." It was a box of herbal tea and a small note. "For sleep, for the baby, for the quiet days you deserve." Natasha stood still in the elevator, the box in her hand. Dante Rossi, a man the world called an icon of power, had a way of caring that felt disarmingly human, like an old friend who knew what to do. She didn't know what he was thinking or why he cared. But that night, for the first time in weeks, Natasha slept peacefully, truly peacefully. By her second week at Rossi Global, Natasha was working tirelessly. She redrew project maps, designed mobile art spaces for cities nationwide, and contacted local non-profits. Each time she presented, Dante listened silently, never interrupting, never correcting. When he did speak, he asked just one question: does this help those communities be heard? That quiet respect made Natasha feel seen, maybe for the first time in a long while. One evening, she stayed late. The rain outside had grown heavier. The office glowed in warm lamplight. She typed until her wrists ached. Then she heard footsteps, slow, even. "You're still here?" Dante's voice was low, calm. Natasha turned, smiling tiredly. "Just finishing the proposal for Boston." "You're still here, too, waiting on an email," he said, setting a cup down beside her. "Chamomile tea. You didn't have to." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." She laughed softly, the first unguarded smile in weeks. "You're the kind of person who can't help caring for others." Dante shrugged. "Maybe. But sometimes a cup of tea at the right time is just a way to say, I see how hard you're trying, and I'm here." The air felt warmer after that. She drew a breath and said quietly, "Thank you, Dante." He nodded, gentle-eyed. "Get some rest, Natasha. We've got a whole life ahead to rebuild." When the door closed behind him, Natasha looked down at her hands, still warm from the cup he'd left. Sometimes, faith returns not through grand gestures, but through a cup of tea on a rainy Seattle night. Oh, bye. A month later, change had truly begun. Her career was taking shape. Her body felt stronger, and inside her, little hope was growing every day. Each morning, Dante stopped by her office for a few minutes. Not to supervise, to ask, "Is she kicking much? Did you sleep last night?" His voice was always soft, as though afraid to disturb something fragile. Then, one morning, as Natasha organized her files, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen. She froze, inhaling deeply, one hand on the desk. Maya rushed over. "Are you okay?" Natasha nodded. "Pali." Dante walked in at that moment, his calm expression flashing instantly to concern. "Call a car," he said firmly. "Mercy General, now." The car sped through the rain, sirens echoing faintly behind them. Natasha gripped the seat, breathing steadily. Dante sat beside her, eyes fixed on her face. "You don't have to come," she murmured. "I know," he said quietly, "but I want to." The exact words he'd said the night he brought her tea. That simple choice to stay broke her open. For the first time in months, she cried, not out of fear, but because someone had chosen to be there. At the hospital, she was examined immediately. Fortunately, it was only early contractions. Nothing dangerous, though the doctor advised several days of rest. Dante waited in the hallway, shirt damp from the rain, hands clasped tightly. When the doctor emerged, he rose at once. "She and the baby are fine," the doctor said. "But she needs complete rest." Dante nodded, murmured a thank you, and entered the room. Natasha lay there, exhausted but safe. He looked at her and said softly, "You scared me half to death." She smiled, weakly. "I promise not to do it again." "Thank you," he whispered. "For both of you." As Natasha drifted to sleep, Dante sat beside her, watching her belly's gentle rise and fall. The light from the lamp softened her tired, resilient face. He reached out, adjusting the blanket, not touching her, but close enough to feel the warmth still there. For the first time in years, Dante Rossi, the man the world called cold as steel, felt his throat tighten. He didn't have a name for what he felt, only that from that moment on, every decision he made would carry the imprint of these two lives in his heart. A woman learning to trust again, and an unborn child teaching him what it means to love without reason. February in Seattle. The rain kept falling steady, tireless, as if the city had forgotten how to stop. Natasha's apartment glowed with a soft golden light. She sat at the dining table, surrounded by sketches for the first exhibition of her new project. A cup of cocoa had long gone cold beside her, and on her laptop screen was a half-finished list of community artists. A strange feeling rippled through her body as she wrote the final notes, gentle but deep. A pulse from within. She froze, hand instinctively on her belly. The first contraction came slowly, then faded. Natasha drew a breath, steadying herself. "Just Braxton Hicks," she whispered. But 10 minutes later, another wave hit stronger this time. There was no mistaking it now. She called 911, her voice calm but trembling. "I'm 38 weeks pregnant. Contractions are regular." While waiting for the ambulance, she typed a quick message she didn't even know why she sent it to him. "Dante, I'm in labor and on my way to Mercy General. Don't worry, I'm fine." His reply came in less than 30 seconds. "I'm coming. Don't worry. No one gives birth alone while I'm still breathing." From far away, a siren wailed through the night. Natasha grabbed the hospital bag she'd packed weeks ago. She breathed evenly, refusing to think about all the times she'd had to do everything alone. This time, someone was on the way. Elf. The ambulance raced through the rain-slicked streets, red and blue lights glancing off the wet walls of the city. The pain came in waves now, fierce and rhythmic, like the ocean crashing against shore. She closed her eyes, focused on her breathing. In, out. "I'm here, little one. I'm here." When the doors opened at the hospital entrance, a tall figure was already there, coat soaked, eyes fixed on the stretcher as it rolled out. Dante Rossi, drenched, breathless, but composed, stepped forward. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Natasha caught a glimpse of him and, somehow, in that chaos of pain and light, she felt safe. In the delivery room, there are bright lights and antiseptic air, and the beeping of the fetal monitor is steady and sure. Dante sat beside her bed, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hair damp. He held her hand small, warm, trembling. "You don't have to," she gasped. "I know," he said softly. "But I want to." The exact words he'd once said the night he brought her tea. "The cervix is at 8 centimeters, the doctor announced. Natasha's grip tightened as another contraction tore through her. "Breathe, Nat." "I'm here," Dante murmured, his deep, calm voice anchoring her through the storm. Time lost its shape every minute, stretched like an hour. Sweat, tears, the sound of heartbeats, the hum of machines. One more push. "Natasha, you're almost there." "You have no idea how much I hate you for letting me see you right now," she gasped. Half sobbing, half laughing, Dante smiled faintly. "You can hate me all you want. Just don't give up." And then, after one last cry and a final, fierce effort, a new sound filled the room. A high, strong, beautiful cry. A tiny life, born in the rain of Seattle. "It's a girl," the doctor said, placing the baby on her chest. A healthy baby girl. Natasha heard nothing else. She looked down at the small, tightly closed eyes, the pink skin, the trembling lips, still forming the sound of life. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." An hour later, the room was quiet but for rain and breathing, 3 rhythms interwoven. Natasha slept, exhausted but peaceful. Beside her, Dante sat motionless, eyes on the baby sleeping in her mother's arms. So small, wrinkled, fragile, her little hands gripped tightly, as if holding on to the world. He touched one tiny finger. Instantly, it curled around his. "So delicate, yet so sure." Dante Rossi, a man who once moved billions with a signature, felt his throat tighten. He swallowed hard and whispered, "Hello there, little one. Your mother's a brave girl." The baby stirred, opening cloudy newborn eyes, and when they met his, something within him shifted, clear, deep, and wordless. "Hope," Natasha's soft voice came from the bed. Dante turned. "Her name is Hope." He smiled. "Hope, yes," she murmured, "because when she came into the world, I found mine again." A silence followed, tender, holy. L'oubli. Morning came with a wash of pale light. The scent of coffee, milk, and chamomile filled the hospital room. Natasha sat against the headboard, cradling Hope in her arms. Dante stood nearby, hands in his pockets, unsure whether he should stay. "You can hold her, if you want," she said, smiling. "Oh, no, that's not necessary." "Dante," she interrupted gently. "I said if you want, not if you have to." He exhaled, then reached out. His large hands held the tiny bundle carefully, reverently. When Hope settled against his chest, her eyes fluttered open, meeting his. A quiet light broke open inside him in the space that had been cold for so long. She sighed, fingers grasping the edge of his shirt, as if she already knew him. "She remembers you," Natasha whispered, half teasing, half in awe. Dante smiled faintly. "You know, I thought I understood happiness once, but maybe I've never been this close to it before." He lowered his head and murmured, "Hope, you are the most beautiful thing to ever happen to your mother. And maybe to your father, too." Natasha looked up. "Father?" He blinked, startled, then smiled, gentle as rain. "I don't know what to call myself, but if you'll let me, I want to stay. Not as a savior, just as someone here when it matters." "You already are," she said softly, touching his arm. "Both of us know that." The day Hope left the hospital, the rain was still falling. Dante drove, Natasha in the back seat with the baby in her arms. Raindrops trailed down the windows, catching the city lights' glow like gold threads. Hope slept peacefully, her tiny breath steady. From the driver's seat, Dante glanced into the rearview mirror now and then. Each time he saw them, his eyes softened. No one spoke. Only the radio playing softly, the sound of rain, and the quiet warmth filling the car. That night, as Natasha lay Hope in her crib, she looked at Seattle glimmering through the rain. She whispered, "You know, Hope, I was never truly alone, and you never will be either." Across the city, Dante looked at a photo on his phone, Natasha holding Hope in her arms, bathed in golden light. He saved it not to show anyone, but to remind himself that some treasures aren't found in stock prices or power. They live in the gaze of a child who has just learned to breathe. And on that damp Seattle night, 3 hearts once strangers began to beat in unison. In the first weeks after giving birth, Natasha's world shrank to the small apartment on Capitol Hill. No more exhibitions, no more interviews, no more stage lights, only the tiny cries of a newborn, the ticking of a clock, and the quiet rhythm of 2 breaths, one mother, one child. Hope was strong from the start. She cried with power, fed well, and slept little. Every time her cry pierced the night, Natasha rose instinctively, holding, rocking, soothing. Every skill she had mastered in her career organization, patience, control was useless now against a being barely heavier than 4 kilograms. Hope didn't need logic. She only needed to be held, hear her mother's heart, and feel warmth. At 3 a.m., Natasha sometimes sat in the rocking chair with Hope swaddled in a blanket, watching the dim light spill through the curtains. Her mind blurred with exhaustion, but her heart felt full. She would whisper, just loud enough for her daughter to hear, "We're going to be okay, Hope, I promise." One morning, as she changed a diaper, the doorbell rang. Natasha sighed. She wasn't planning to answer. Reporters still lurked in the neighborhood. But the second knock came gentle, patient, unhurried. She peeked through the peephole. Dante Rossi. He stood there without a suit, just a grey sweater and the fatigue of an overnight flight on his face. In his hands, a paper bag and a small bouquet of lavender. When the door opened, he said only one thing: "Coffee for the mom, oatmeal for the baby." Natasha laughed her first real laugh in days. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." She looked at him for a moment, then stepped aside. The apartment was messy, bottles, blankets, notebooks scattered across the table. Dante said nothing. He set the bag down, rolled up his sleeves, and made coffee movements so natural that she couldn't help but stare. "You do this often for someone?" He smiled. "No one. But Google's a fast teacher." When Natasha brought Hope out, Dante stopped what he was doing. Everything in him softened: his gaze, his breath, even his posture. "She's growing fast." 3 weeks, Natasha said quietly. "She changes every day. Every morning I'm afraid I'll miss something." Dante nodded, eyes fixed on the child in her arms. "You're not missing anything. You're here. That's what matters. No grand promises. No pity. Just the quiet understanding of someone who knew the power of staying." That afternoon, when Natasha was too tired to move after feeding, Dante washed dishes, took out the trash, and folded towels. He worked in silence, not seeking gratitude, simply knowing she didn't have the strength to refuse help. Before leaving, he left a small note on the counter. "If you need anything, call me, no reason required. If you want 2 hours of sleep, I can watch Hope. Dr." A small note, folded neatly like the man himself. That night, Natasha didn't call, but she read those words repeatedly, and for the first time, she felt something stir trust. As 3 weeks later, Hope started sleeping longer. Natasha used the quiet hours to open her laptop, check emails, and approve exhibition plans. Maya had written, "Mr. Rossi told me not to send you any work for 6 weeks, but I'm guessing you'll ignore that." Natasha smiled. That sounded like her never knowing how to rest. That afternoon, a new message arrived. "Can I stop by? Dr." When Dante came, Hope was lying in her crib, waving her little hands like she was dancing. He took off his coat and stood watching, silent. "Would you like to hold her?" Natasha asked. "Only if you trust me." "I do." The answer came faster than she expected. She placed Hope into his arms. The baby stirred, gripped the edge of his shirt, and nestled against his chest, utterly at peace. Dante didn't move or speak, afraid to breathe too loudly and disturb the moment. "You're doing great," Natasha whispered. He smiled. "No, she's the one doing great." When Hope drifted back to sleep, they sat by the window, watching the rain trace lines across the lake. "Do you ever think about starting over?" Dante asked. Natasha gave a small, tired laugh. "I am. Every day, every breath." "I don't mean from the pain," he said gently. "I mean truly starting over. From yourself." The question quieted her. Streetlights glowed across his face, a face not flawless, but honest in a way that felt safe. "Maybe," she said after a moment, "but I'm not ready to trust anyone else." "That's fine," Dante nodded. "Then start by trusting that I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him not as a woman searching for rescue, but as someone daring to believe in another person again. 2. After that day, he came by more often. No schedules, no fuss. Sometimes to warm a bottle. Sometimes, "I watch Hope while Natasha takes a shower." Once, he brought a small oak cradle hand-carved, recycled from old exhibition wood she had once used. "For you and her," he said, "because everything beautiful begins with renewal." She said nothing, but something inside her, something long cracked, began to mend. 1-0. One night, Hope caught a mild cold. Her tiny cough terrified Natasha. She called the doctor, then without thinking dialed Dante. 15 minutes later, he was there, coat still damp from rain. He gently took Hope from her arms, listening to the baby's breathing. "She's okay," he said softly, patting her back. "Just a cold. I called my family doctor, he's on his way." Natasha covered her face, tears spilling out. "I'm scared. Scared I'm not doing enough." He sat beside her, voice low and steady. "No one ever does enough. We try every day, and you're doing beautifully." She looked up. Under the warm light, his eyes were clear, kind, steady, without pity. "You know something, Dante?" she whispered. "What?" "Sometimes I think maybe God sent you to remind me that there are still good people in the world." He smiled, glancing down at Hope. "I don't know if I'm a good man, Natasha. I'm just someone who stayed. Well, Moses." That night, when Dante left, the rain began again. Natasha stood by the window, watching his shadow fade into the mist. Hope stirred, then settled back into sleep, a faint smile curving her lips. Natasha touched the glass and whispered, "Hope, some people don't come to save us. They come to stay." Summer came slowly to Seattle. Soft golden light poured through the office window, glinting off a photo frame on the desk, Natasha holding Hope in her arms, both smiling amid a field of lavender Dante had given them for Hope's 6-month birthday. It had been 3 weeks since Natasha returned to full-time work at Rossi Global. She was no longer the woman who once sat silent in a dark apartment. Now she walked with confidence, her gaze steady, her voice clear. But no matter how strong she had become, returning to work after motherhood was never easy. That morning, Hope had been fussy since 4 a.m. Natasha fed her, changed her, soothed her, then still managed to reach the office at 8:45. Maya was waiting by the door, holding out her usual cup of coffee. "Mr. Rossi pushed the meeting back 15 minutes so you could rest a little." Natasha smiled. "He didn't have to do that." "He did, and no one dared argue," Maya replied, half teasing, half sincere. The conference room glowed bright with morning light. Dante was already there, flipping through notes. He looked up when she entered. "Good morning, Natasha." "Good morning, Dante." He glanced at the thick stack of reports. "I know you had a long night. We can shorten the meeting if you need." She shook her head, calm and firm. "No need. I want to stay on schedule." He nodded, his eyes flickering over her face, not to judge, but to ensure she was all right. In that sunlit room, they were once again CEO and creative director. Yet between the plans and the charts, there were those quiet, unguarded moments when their eyes met for a second too long, then slipped away, as if both knew that one more heartbeat of eye contact might blur every line between them. And slew. That afternoon, Natasha stopped by the daycare to pick up Hope. The baby had just learned to roll over, her chubby hands reaching out when she saw her mother. Her laugh rang bright like sunlight breaking through rain. "Were you a good girl today, Hope?" Hope answered by waving a toy proudly. Natasha held her close, breathing in the scent of milk and baby powder, the scent of peace. Every time she carried her child, she felt a little more whole. On the drive home, her phone buzzed. "Dr. I left a small gift on your desk. Don't worry, not a contract." When she got home, she opened her bag. Inside was a wooden picture frame, with a small engraving along the edge. For every first step, someone must be waiting. Beneath it was a photo, Hope lying on the office rug, tiny legs kicking, while Dante leaned down toward her, eyes filled with a quiet tenderness words could never capture. Maya had taken it when Natasha had stepped out of the room. Natasha smiled gratitude and something fragile, almost trembling, rising in her chest. N2. A month later, they flew together to Denver, the first stop in the Cultural Development Initiative's community exhibition tour. Natasha brought Hope and her nanny along. The flight was long. The baby fussed, but Dante never complained. He sat beside them, fastening Hope's safety belt with surprising skill. "Where did you learn that?" Natasha asked. "I practiced on a teddy bear," he said so seriously she couldn't help but laugh. As the plane descended, she turned to him and said quietly, "Thank you, Dante, for never letting me do anything alone, even the smallest things." He smiled faintly. "Nothing about you is small." 2. The Denver exhibition exceeded every expectation. When Natasha spoke on stage, the spotlight reflected off Hope, sleeping soundly against her chest in a sling. She said, "We create art not just to display it, but to heal. And sometimes, the one who needs healing most is the artist." The room fell silent. Dante watched her from the back of the hall, his eyes never leaving her. When she finished, he was the first to applaud. That night, they celebrated at a small restaurant by the lake. Hope slept in her stroller beside them. Natasha gazed at the shimmering reflections on the water. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I'd never trust a man again. And now?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Now, I trust people who listen." "I'll take that as a compliment," Dante said. "It's the truth." A peaceful silence followed. He asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like you're living again?" Natasha looked at Hope, her lips twitching as she dreamed. "Not living again," she said. "Living for real, for the first time." And, back in Seattle, life found a gentle rhythm. In the mornings, Natasha worked in her office with Hope in the little oak cradle by the window. Around noon, Dante would often stop by, not for business, to lean down and greet the baby. "Have you noticed?" Maya teased one day. "Mr. Rossi only really smiles when he's here." Natasha laughed it off, but she knew Maya was right. One afternoon, as Natasha was in a Zoom interview, Hope began to crawl for the first time. Wobbly, determined, she reached out toward the person closest to her, Dante. He bent down, hands open. Hope inched forward, then reached him, giggling with triumph. The reporter on the other side of the call smiled. "Looks like your little one just hit a milestone." Natasha laughed, glancing at Dante. "Yes, the first steps. There's always someone waiting." Dante met her gaze, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, gentle, confident, and alive. That night, Natasha wrote in her journal, "Today, hope crawled for the first time." Dante was the first person she saw, and when she laughed, I realized maybe everything really is starting to change. She closed the notebook and looked out at the night beyond the window. Seattle's rain still fell, but it didn't feel lonely this time. It sounded like a song she'd finally learned to sing, the song of two souls, and one small heartbeat, learning to move toward each other, just one step at a time. Autumn arrived in Seattle. Maple leaves flamed red along the slopes around Lake Union. On the 12th floor of the Rossi Cultural Center, the lights were still on, though midnight was only 10 minutes away. Natasha sat before her screen, refining the final details of an exhibition report. The coffee beside her had gone cold. Behind her, Hope slept peacefully in her portable crib, clutching a silver bunny. The door opened softly. Dante entered without a sound, bringing the faint scent of cold wind and wood smoke from the hallway fireplace. "You're still here?" His voice was low, warm. "Almost done," Natasha replied without looking up. "You're still here, too. I just came to see if you needed anything." "I need 8 hours of sleep," she said with a laugh, "but that might take a few years." He chuckled and set a cup of ginger tea beside her. "No more coffee. Your heart needs a break." Natasha turned, her eyes meeting his in the amber light. "You always know exactly what I need, Rossi." "It's not that I know," he said softly. "It's that I pay attention." Something shifted then, not loudly, not suddenly, but enough for both of them to feel it. She lowered her gaze to the report, pretending to focus, though her heartbeat had gone uneven. He stood silently by the window, looking out at the glittering city, feeling an unfamiliar fear stir within him, the kind that comes when you realize one more step could change everything. The next morning, Natasha arrived later than usual. Maya was already there, and so was Dante. They were laughing, that rare kind of laugh from a man who usually kept everything under control. Hope sat on Dante's lap, playing with his pen. "She's stolen my pen," he said when Natasha walked in. "My daughter has excellent taste," she replied, smiling. Maya slipped out quietly, leaving them in the soft quiet of the office. "Do you notice?" Dante asked. "She always smiles when you walk in." "And I notice," Natasha said gently. "She's always calm when in your arms." He fell silent. For a moment, the only sound was the faint tap of the pen against the desk. "Finally," he said, "there are things I never thought I'd do, but I want to try harder every time Hope looks at me." Natasha studied him, the morning light tracing his calm face. "You've changed." "Maybe," he admitted. "You have too. We both have since she came into our lives." Hezesian. That week, a heavy rain swept through Seattle. One night, Natasha got a call from the daycare. Hope had a high fever and was being taken to the hospital. She threw on her coat and ran out the door. Just as she reached her car, her phone rang. "Dante." "I'm already here," he said. "The doctor's checking on her. Drive safe." When she arrived, he was holding Hope in his arms, the baby trembling, eyes glassy with fever. The sight made Natasha's chest tighten. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Dante shook his head. "Don't thank me. She's our daughter." Those 3 words, "our daughter," fell into the room like a drop of water breaking still glass. Natasha looked at him, and in that instant, every wall between them collapsed. The doctor entered, breaking the silence. It was just a viral fever, nothing serious. But for Natasha, the night had felt like a test to see who would stay when the world tilted. That night, she and Dante took turns watching over Hope. When the baby finally slept, Natasha leaned her head against his shoulder. "Were you scared?" she whispered. "Yes," he said truthfully. "Scared of losing something I haven't yet dared to name." Natasha lifted her gaze. Their eyes met in the dim light. No words followed. None were needed. Afrubuland. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the hospital window. Hope was awake, smiling again. She looked from Dante to Natasha, then giggled, reaching out. "Dada." Natasha smiled, brushing her daughter's hair. "That's right, Hope. Dada's here." Dante looked at them both, a rush of joy and fear rising together. He had fallen in love with them completely, irreversibly. When the doctor cleared them to go home, Natasha turned to him. "You should rest for a few days. I know you haven't slept." "I'll rest when you're both safe at home," he said. On the drive back, Hope slept in her car seat, her soft breathing filling the quiet. Dante kept his eyes on the road, his voice low. "Natasha, I don't want to be just your partner at work." She turned toward him, silent. He continued, "You don't have to say anything now. I want you to know I'm here, not out of obligation, but because I want to stay." Natasha didn't reply, but when they stopped in front of her home, she said softly, "You know, Dante, sometimes people don't need a confession. They need someone who stays day after day, hour after hour, and you've already done that." As Irwin, after putting Hope to sleep that night, Natasha opened the window, letting the calm wind drift in. A cup of ginger tea sat on the table, the kind he always made for her now gone cold. She touched the rim, felt the faint sweetness left behind, and smiled. Somewhere across the city, Dante was still awake. He opened his laptop and looked at a photo from the hospital. Hope smiling in her mother's arms, Natasha's eyes tired, but shining with something he had never seen before. "Faith," he whispered into the quiet, like a promise. "I'm not going anywhere. This is home, Latte Autumn in Seattle." The air turned crisp. Rain fell like threads of silver, slipping quietly through every window pane. The scent of coffee, warm pastries, and soft jazz mingled in Natasha's apartment, the familiar breath of morning. Hope sat in her high chair, fistfuls of mashed bananas smeared across her face. "My little artist is turning breakfast into abstract expressionism." Natasha laughed, wiping her daughter's cheeks with a small towel. The door opened quietly. Dante stepped in, his coat still damp with mist. He carried a small paper bag croissants from her favorite cafe in Fremont. "You're early," she said, surprised. "Couldn't sleep. Thought someone might need coffee," he replied, his voice deep and warm. Hope squealed when she saw him, reaching out her arms. "Dada." He bent down, lifting her and kissing her hair. "Good morning, little artist." Natasha paused momentarily, watching the scene unfold. A man once so controlled, so distant, now holding a child, and speaking with a gentleness that softened the room, and she realized she couldn't imagine her life without this image anymore. Bilo. After breakfast, they brought Hope to the cultural center. Natasha met with a group of artists, while Dante, who should have been in an investment conference, chose to stay. He sat in the children's room, reading documents as Hope played on the floor, occasionally tugging at his hand, so he would help her build wooden towers. Each time the blocks toppled, he gasped dramatically, making her laugh out loud. A new staff member walked by and smiled. "Are you Mrs. Monroe's husband?" Dante looked up, ready to correct her, then paused. "No. Not yet," he said, smiling. Well, by late afternoon, Natasha left her meeting to find him sitting on the lobby couch. Hope was asleep on his chest, one tiny hand gripping the lapel of his jacket. The sight made her heart stutter. He looked up, smiling softly. She just won a battle with sleep. Natasha sat beside him, watching the baby's peaceful face. "You're good with her. She rarely naps this long. I have a secret." "Oh?" A steady heartbeat, a low voice, and patience. She chuckled, then fell silent. The room felt weightless, the rain whispering against the windows. She naturally leaned on his shoulder, as if she had done it for years. He didn't move away. He tilted his head slightly closer, closing the space between them. End. In the days that followed, Dante came by more often. No appointments, no explanations, simply because he wanted to be near. While Natasha worked, he read to Hope. When Hope slept, they drank tea and talked about art, music, and how creativity could heal a city. One night, the power went out. The apartment glowed with candlelight and the faint shimmer of the street outside. Natasha held Hope, humming softly until the baby slept. When she turned, Dante sat at the table, his shadow flickering on the wall. He looked up, smiling. "You two look like a painting. You sound like a man planning to buy it." No, he said quietly. I just want to live in it. The air went still. Natasha exhaled a small laugh, but said nothing. She knew one more word would erase the last boundary between them. Weeks later, Hope began to walk. She wobbled forward, arms outstretched, eyes bright with delight. Natasha filmed on her phone, laughing breathlessly. Careful, sweetheart. Hope took another step, then another, and fell straight into Dante's waiting arms. He caught her easily, laughing. Good job, Hope. Next time 3 steps. She giggled, clapping her hands. Natasha watched them, 2 people she loved differently, but both now etched into her heart. That night, she replayed the video. Hope took her first steps in the frame while Dante waited, arms open, and Natasha saw it. He wasn't just looking at the child. He was looking at her. The way his eyes softened told her that something fundamental between them had changed. To end of OT. One late afternoon, they stayed behind at the office. The sunset spilled gold across the room. Dante was packing his papers while Natasha stood before a canvas prepared for her upcoming exhibit. What do you think, she asked, about the line between work and emotion? He didn't hesitate. Sometimes emotion is a part of work you can't separate, especially when that work is the person. She said nothing. He stepped closer, just close enough for her to catch the faint scent of oak and soap. Natasha, he said quietly, I know I'm supposed to keep my distance, but every day, that distance gets smaller. She looked at him, her voice trembling but steady. I know. And I don't want to keep it anymore. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The light brush of his hand against her cheek, the gentle grip around her wrist, was enough to dissolve the whole world into stillness. Or lose. Back home, Natasha opened her phone and replayed the video that night. Hope was taking her first steps, and Dante was waiting with open arms. She paused on the frame where the child smiled, and the 2 adults looked at each other, their eyes warm enough to stop time. She whispered into the quiet, like a confession meant only for the dark. Between us, it's no longer a coincidence. Winter draped Seattle in soft gray, the chill seeping quietly through the narrow streets by the lake. Inside Natasha's apartment, the fireplace crackled softly. Hope was learning to speak, her small, uncertain sounds blending into bursts of laughter. Mama, she said, voice high and clear. Natasha smiled, clapping her hands. That's right, sweetheart. Hope giggled and turned toward the man beside her, Dante, helping her stack wooden blocks. She pointed at him, eyes bright. Dada. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind outside, the pop of wood in the fire, the hush of 2 hearts stopping at once. Natasha looked at Dante. He was still, the block frozen in his hand. Hope clapped again, delighted, repeating louder, Dada, Dada. This time Dante smiled, a genuine smile, unguarded, touched with disbelief. He lifted her into his arms and kissed her hair. You're right, he murmured. Dada's here. Natasha stood silent. Part of her wanted to laugh, part wanted to cry, and part wanted to hold them both and never let go. She knew then that nothing in their lives would be the same again. That evening, after Hope had fallen asleep, they sat on the balcony, watching the mist roll over the city lights. You heard her, didn't you? Natasha said softly. Impossible not to, Dante replied. He'll never forget it. She turned toward him and saw the eyes that had once been guarded, proud, now softened in a way that made her breath catch. You know, she whispered, that was the first time she ever called anyone that. I know. He hesitated, then said quietly, but I don't want to take a place that isn't mine, unless you want me to. The words hit something deep in her chest. Devon walked out of her life, she said, voice small but steady. You never did. Dante stared into the grey distance. Some men become fathers because they have to, he said. Others become fathers because they choose to. Natasha smiled through tears. And you've chosen. I have, he said, and his voice sounded like a vow. Oh, the following Monday, a photo began circulating online. Natasha is holding Hope at the opening of the new cultural center in Detroit. Dante standing beside them, his hand resting gently on the baby's back. The look he gave them, warm, unguarded, was too real to be mistaken for professionalism. The next morning, Art and Life Weekly ran the headline, From Public Betrayal to Private Healing. Natasha Monroe and CEO Dante Rossi. Is this still just collaboration? Maya entered Dante's office with a printed copy. The press is buzzing. They think you and she are a couple. Dante skimmed the page once, voice calm. Let them think what they want. But what about her? Maya asked quietly. He paused. She deserves the truth, not rumors. That afternoon, Natasha entered his office, the magazine in her hand. You've seen it? I have. What do you plan to do? Don't deny it. She stopped. You're sure? Are you? He asked. Their eyes met, and there was no fear in hers anymore, only quiet certainty. No need to hide, she said softly. We haven't done anything wrong. No, he agreed. Just something rare. To Allah. 2 weeks later, they attended a charity gala together. Golden light, soft piano, a room filled with the hum of conversation. As they entered the hall, Dante reached for her hand, not hiding, not hesitant. Heads turned, whispers followed, but Natasha walked tall, smiling. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of being seen. When they reached the main table, a reporter called out, Mr. Rossi, are the rumors about you and Miss Monroe true? Dante looked at Natasha, his eyes warm. There are no rumors, he said. Just a family learning how to walk together. Cameras flashed wildly. Natasha felt his hand in hers and saw Maya holding Hope nearby, the baby laughing under the lights. She realized they no longer had to hide. In boat. That night, after the event, they drove home in silence. Hope was asleep in the back seat, the city glistening outside, soaked in rain. Natasha kicked off her heels, sinking into the couch. You know, she said softly, I once thought I didn't need love, just peace. But you. I'm not peace, Dante interrupted, his tone gentle. I'm just the one who stayed to build it with you. She looked at him, eyes shining with a faith born only from people who've lost everything once before. Do you ever regret it? Regret what? Walking into the life of a broken woman and a child who isn't yours? He moved closer, kneeling before her, his dark eyes steady. Natasha, I didn't walk into your life, he said slowly. I stayed when the world walked out, and staying is the only choice I'll never regret. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Dante, he brushed them away gently. You know, he whispered, I loved you long before you believed you deserved to be loved. For the first time, she didn't run. She leaned forward, lips trembling, and kissed him slow, tender, honest. It wasn't a promise or an escape, just a quiet truth. They had come too far ever to go back. I know. Later that night, when Hope cried out from a dream, they both rushed to her room. Dante lifted her, rocking gently. Dada's here, little one. You're okay. Hope nestled into his chest, her breathing softening again. Natasha stood by, watching them, and felt something rise inside her that she didn't need to name, because it already had one. It was family, too. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains. Natasha poured coffee and watched as Dante played with Hope on the floor. Mr. Rossi, she said, her tone light but full, maybe it's time we stop calling this a coincidence. He looked up, that rare smile warming his entire face. I agree. I stopped believing it was a coincidence a long time ago. Hope threw a wooden block toward them, making both of them laugh. And in that moment between laughter, coffee, and morning light, the word family was no longer just an idea. It was real, simple, sacred. Spring in Seattle. The air was damp, laced with apple blossoms, and sunlight spread thin as silk over the lake. Natasha stood in the small garden behind the cultural center, where she'd launched her first exhibition after the scandal. Now, the sculptures and canvases around her no longer spoke of pain but stood quietly as testaments to rebirth. Maya came up and adjusted the delicate veil on her shoulder. Are you ready? Natasha smiled softly. I've been ready since the day he held Hope in the hospital. Music began, a simple melody of strings and piano. Hope, in a tiny white dress and a crown of flowers, tossed petals along the path with comical seriousness. Then she turned, waving. Mama, hurry, Dada's waiting. Natasha laughed. At the end of the flower-strewn aisle, Dante waited. He wore a smoky grey suit, simple, sharp, effortlessly elegant. But it wasn't his clothes that stopped her heart. It was how he looked at her, the look of a man who had known loss, fear, hesitation, and finally found home. As she reached him, he whispered, "You're beautiful, Natasha. You say that every morning before I've brushed my hair, because you're most beautiful when you're yourself." They stood face to face, hands entwined. No lavish ceremony, no choir, just the rustle of leaves, the hush of wind, and the voice of the elderly officiant, steady and kind, stitching two weathered souls into one quiet promise. "Does anyone object?" Hope shot her hand into the air, her solemn expression making everyone laugh. No one's allowed to object. Dada and Mama already belong to each other. Laughter rippled through the garden. Dante bent down to kiss his daughter's forehead, then turned to Natasha, his voice barely above a whisper. "I choose you today, tomorrow, and every day after," she answered, trembling but sure. "And I choose you not because I need saving, but because you make me believe that love can be peace." Their first kiss as husband and wife was soft and unhurried, not a beginning, but an arrival. Hope laughed as the wind rustled and applause rose, tugging Maya's hand. Mama's smiling. Dada too. He's zero. After the wedding, they didn't take an extravagant honeymoon. Dante bought a small house on Bainbridge Island, a white sand beach with pine trees brushing the water. In the mornings, Natasha painted in the glass studio facing the sea, Hope played in the sand, and Dante made coffee, reading the paper in the sunlight. They didn't need luxury, only the three of them together. Once, Hope asked, "Dada, why isn't our house big like in the movies?" He lifted her and said, "Because big houses are easy to buy, but a house filled with laughter like ours, that's rare." Natasha smiled when she heard him. She had never wanted more than this. And 3 years later, the little seaside house echoed with a new cry, a baby boy named Marcus. Hope sat beside the crib, head tilted in wonder. "He's so tiny," she observed. "You were just as tiny when you were born," Natasha said. Hope looked at Dante. "I'm the big sister now. Dada, you have to listen to me." Dante nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am." Laughter filled the room. Tutu. Time passed. Natasha remained the creative director of the cultural initiative, which had expanded to over 15 cities. Dante stepped back from corporate life and founded a non-profit art fund, the Hope Foundation. They lived, surrounded by what was real, light, art, and love. One afternoon, in the small studio, Natasha guided 6-year-old Hope's hand across a canvas. The girl's fingers were covered in paint. "Mama, did I come from a painting?" she asked. "No," Natasha said softly. "You came from the heart." Hope smiled and leaned against her. "I thought so." Dante stood in the doorway, watching them, his chest full of something beyond words. He thought of the rain, the tears, the nights of fear, and realized they were only the backdrop for this quiet peace. End of 6. 10 years after their wedding, Natasha opened a special exhibition, The Art of Staying. It wasn't just paintings, but a tribute to those who had chosen to remain when leaving would have been easier. At the center stood a large canvas, a man holding a child, a woman watching them from a distance, her lips curved in a knowing smile. On the frame, Natasha had written a single line: "Family isn't born, it's chosen." Only 3 remained in the empty hall when the exhibition ended and the lights dimmed. Hope, now a young woman, leaned on Dante's shoulder. "You always knew you were chosen, didn't you?" Natasha asked. Hope nodded, eyes bright. "Of course. Otherwise, why would Dada have come to the hospital that day?" Dante chuckled, squeezing her shoulder. "You remember everything." "I remember because Mama told me, and Dada proved it every day." Natasha turned to him, their gaze still carrying the same gratitude and love as it had in that hospital years ago. "You know," she whispered, "if someone asked me to define love," he smiled, "what would you say? That it means not leaving." He pulled her close, and choosing each other, every morning. End of 12. As the wind swept across the shore that night, they stood together under the moonlight. Hope and Marcus played in the sand, tracing circles that shimmered under silver light. Natasha rested her head on Dante's shoulder. "Do you remember the first day?" she asked. "I do," he said. "Your blue dress, the studio lights, the pain you tried so hard to hide, and you stayed. I always will." A pause, filled only by the sound of waves. Dante turned to her, taking her hand. "I used to think fate brought me there to save you," he said. "But now I know you and hope saved me from an empty life." She smiled, tears glinting on her cheeks. "We chose each other, Dante, and I'd choose you again forever." Some stories don't begin with love, but with compassion that grows into something more profound. Natasha never needed a savior, only someone who stayed. And Dante, once a man of logic, learned to love through presence. They didn't find each other by fate. They chose each other daily among a million other possibilities. Because sometimes, family isn't what you're born into. It's what you build, together,